Korean Mafia boss saw his black waitress hiding a gun in his kitchen, but he didn't understand why it matched his. Park Jin-soo did not become the most feared man in Seoul's underground by being careless. Every detail of his life was calculated, every room swept, every employee vetted, every weapon accounted for. He had built an empire on precision, on knowing exactly what was in his kitchen, in his safe, in his circle. So when he walked into his private residence at 11:47 on a Tuesday night and caught the flicker of movement near the spice rack, a flash of metal, a hand moving too fast, a sound that didn't belong, his body reacted before his mind could. He had her cornered in 4 seconds. Her name was Simone Carter. She had been his housekeeper for 3 months. Quiet, efficient, never asked questions, never lingered. He had chosen her specifically because she had no visible connection to any of the families, any of the crews, any of the people who wanted him dead. She was supposed to be invisible. She was holding a Walther PPK, matte black, with a worn grip and a scratch along the barrel that formed a slight curve, almost like a crescent moon. Park Jin-soo's blood went cold, because he had that exact gun locked in a steel safe behind the painting in his study. He had owned it for 22 years. He had never registered it. He had never shown it to anyone. He had never, not once, let it leave that safe. And yet, here was this woman, this quiet, unremarkable woman who made his meals and folded his laundry, holding what appeared to be its twin. He drew his own weapon. "Don't move," he said. She didn't. What he expected was panic, excuses, maybe a lunge for the door. What he got instead was something that knocked the breath from his chest, something he had no framework for, something that cracked the careful architecture of his composure straight down the middle. She looked at the gun in his hand, and she started to cry. Not from fear. He had seen fear. Fear was frantic, loud, unpredictable. This was different. Her face crumpled, like something in her had finally, after years of holding itself rigid, given way. Her shoulders dropped, her jaw trembled, and the tears came slow and quiet, like something that had been waiting a very long time to fall. "You know what this is," she whispered. It wasn't a question. Park Jin-soo stared at the weapon in her hand, at the crescent scratch, at the worn grip, at the identical weight and balance to the gun he had held 1,000 times. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. She looked up at him. Her eyes were red, but behind the tears was something he recognized. Not guilt, not desperation, not the look of someone caught. It was grief. "The same place you got yours," she said. He didn't shoot her. That alone would have surprised anyone who knew him. Park Jin-soo had made harder decisions than this. He had given orders that emptied rooms, that silenced problems, that kept his empire intact. One unarmed woman, because she lowered the gun slowly and set it on the counter without being asked, should not have complicated anything. But she did. He kept his weapon trained on her while she pulled out the chair at the kitchen table and sat down, unbidden, as if she had been waiting for this moment for 3 months and she was simply done pretending she hadn't. "Talk," he said. She folded her hands on the table. "My father's name was Marcus Carter. He was an investigator, not police, private. He worked for people who couldn't go to the police, people who had been cheated, threatened, disappeared from. He was good at it." She paused. "He was also the kind of man who made enemies." Park Jin-soo said nothing. 18 years ago, she continued, someone killed him. shot him in a parking garage in Incheon. He was there for a job. He had followed a lead across 3 countries, from Atlanta to London to Seoul. And someone found out he was close to something, and they put a bullet in him before he could finish. Park Jin-soo's grip on his weapon did not loosen, but something behind his eyes shifted. "He left almost nothing behind," she said. "No case files, no notes. His phone was wiped. His laptop was taken. The only thing that made it back to us, to me and my mother, was a box of his personal belongings from the hotel. And inside that box was a gun." She nodded toward the Walther PPK on the counter. That gun, with a serial number that had been filed off and a scratch on the barrel that looked like a crescent moon. The kitchen was very quiet. "I spent 17 years trying to figure out where that gun came from," she said. "Who owned it before him? How he got it? Because I have always believed, that gun is the only thread left. That whoever owned it before my father is connected to whoever killed him." She looked at Park Jin-soo directly, without flinching. "And 3 months ago, I found a record. Old, partial, almost nothing. A transaction log from a weapons broker who worked Seoul's underground in the 90s. The gun was sold. To a man whose name I didn't recognize, but whose description, Korean, late 20s, known to operate in the Eastern District, matched someone I eventually traced to this address." She held his gaze. "To you." The silence stretched. Park Jin-soo slowly lowered his weapon. Not because he trusted her. He didn't trust anyone. But because something in his chest had just split open, and he needed both hands free to deal with whatever was about to come out of it. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I need you to tell me," he said quietly, "exactly what your father looked like." She described him without hesitation. Tall, dark-skinned like her, a beard he kept close, a habit of wearing the same green jacket regardless of the weather, a scar on his left hand from a job that had gone wrong in Marseille. "Patient eyes," she said. "He had very patient eyes." By the time she finished, Park Jin-soo was staring at the table. "Marcus," he said. The name felt strange in his mouth, like something he had buried so completely he had almost convinced himself it wasn't real. "You knew him," she said. It wasn't a question either. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she started to wonder if she had miscalculated. If coming here, taking this job, hiding that gun, waiting 3 months for this exact moment, if all of it had been a terrible mistake. Then he said, "He saved my life." He told her slowly, not because he was reluctant. He had been carrying this for 18 years, and the weight of it had long since stopped being something he could manage alone. He spoke slowly because he wanted to get it right, because this woman had spent 17 years with a ghost, and she deserved the full picture. 20 years ago, Park Jin-soo was not a boss. He was young and reckless and running product for a man named Choi Byung-hwan, a name that meant nothing outside of Seoul's underground and everything inside it. Choi was the kind of man who built loyalty through fear and eliminated problems before they became threats. Park Jin-soo had been one of his most reliable operators, until he wasn't. He had found something he wasn't supposed to find, a discrepancy in the books, evidence that Choi had been systematically skimming from partnerships with people who would not tolerate it if they ever found out. Park Jin-soo had made the mistake of confronting him, quietly, privately, the way a loyal man handles internal business. Choi had responded by putting a contract on his head. "I had 3 days," he told her, "maybe less. I had no money that wasn't controlled by Choi's people, no safe house, no one I could trust inside the organization. I was running in a city where everyone who could help me was connected to the man who wanted me dead. He had ended up hiding in the back office of a laundromat owned by an old woman who owed him a debt. No phone, no weapon, nothing. "A man found me on the second day," he said. "He came in through the back, sat down across from me, just like this. I thought he was one of Choi's people. I was ready to fight or die, whichever came first." He paused. "He put a gun on the table between us. That gun. And he said, 'I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because the man who wants you dead is connected to something much larger than you know, and you're the only person alive right now who can tell me what I need to know.'" Simone's eyes were very still. "His name was Marcus," Park Jin-soo said. "He had been investigating Choi for 8 months. Not the crimes I knew about, something older, something that ran across borders. He needed information I had, and I needed to survive long enough to give it. We made a deal." He looked at his hands. "He got me out of Seoul. He had contacts, people who moved quietly, no questions, no records. He used favors he had been saving for years to get me to a safe house outside the city. He spent 4 days with me, taking everything I knew about Choi's operation, every name, every location, every transaction I could remember. And then he gave me that gun." He nodded toward the Walther PPK on the counter. "And he said to keep it, that he had a second one, that if anything ever went wrong, if I ever saw someone carrying that gun, I would know they were connected to him." The silence in the kitchen was enormous. "He said it was a system he used," Park Jin-soo continued, "for people he trusted, a matched pair, a way of proving a connection when words weren't safe." Simone's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "He gave you the original. He kept the copy. That was his system. He always made a copy, and he only gave originals to people he trusted with his life." Park Jin-soo nodded slowly. "He saved mine," he said. "And then 2 months later, I heard he was dead." She had to know how much he knew. That was the only way to figure out what had actually happened. "Did you ever tell anyone?" she asked. "About what Marcus gave you? About the information?" "No." "Why not?" He looked at her steadily. "Because the day after he got me out, he called me from a payphone and told me that the people he was investigating had reached into places I couldn't imagine. He told me that if the information ever surfaced before he was ready to use it, it would disappear, and so would anyone connected to it. He told me to wait, that he would contact me when it was safe." "He never contacted you?" "No." She leaned back in her chair. Her mind was moving fast, assembling pieces, and Park Jin-soo watched her do it. He was a man who read people for a living, and what he saw on her face was not the calculation of someone running a con. It was the desperate focus of someone finally touching the edges of something they had been reaching for most of their life. "The people he was investigating," she said. "Choi Byung-hwan's people. Do you know what happened to them?" "Choi died 4 years after Marcus. Internal dispute. One of his lieutenants had him killed. The organization fragmented. Most of the upper level was arrested or eliminated within 2 years." "And the wider network? The thing Marcus was actually investigating? Across borders?" Park Jin-soo was quiet for a moment. "That," he said carefully, "is where it becomes complicated." He stood up and went to the window. Not from nerves. He had a practiced stillness that had nothing to do with comfort. He stood at the window because what he was about to say required him to look at something other than her face while he said it. "After Marcus died, I built what I have now," From nothing. I was careful, more careful than most, because I had learned what happened when you weren't. And over the years, certain information came to me, not because I sought it, because in this world, if you survive long enough and keep your ears open, things find you. He turned to look at her. 2 years ago, a man came to me, former intelligence. He had been investigating a financial network, money laundering, arms brokering, trafficking of multiple kinds, that had operated across Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe since the late 90s. He told me the network had been nearly exposed once, that there had been a private investigator, an American, who had gotten close enough to unravel everything, and that the network had found out and had him killed. Simone's face had gone very still. He told me the investigator's name, Park Jin-soo said. Marcus Carter. She closed her eyes. He gave her a moment. The man who came to me had been trying to build a case for years. He had partial records, financial trails, witness accounts, internal communications, but he was missing the critical piece, the piece Marcus had gathered in the months before he died. The testimony, the evidence that connected the network's leadership to the murders they had ordered to protect themselves. The information you gave Marcus, she said. Her eyes were open again. Yes. Which you still have. He didn't answer immediately, but she was watching him the way her father must have watched people. Patient, waiting, already knowing. Where is it? She asked. Safe, he said. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. The night had moved past midnight. The city outside his window was quieter now. Not silent, because Seoul was never truly silent, but lower, the way a held breath sounds different from a normal one. He made tea. She didn't ask him to. He simply put the kettle on because his hands needed something to do, and because this conversation was not finished, and they both knew it. He set a cup in front of her. She looked at it, and then at him. Why didn't you give that information to the man who came to you 2 years ago? Because I didn't trust him. Why? Because the man who was supposed to contact me when it was safe never did. Because Marcus is dead, and the person who knew the full shape of what he was building died with him. Because in my experience, people who show up asking you to trust them with something dangerous have reasons for asking that they haven't told you. He sat back down. And because the information Marcus gave me wasn't just testimony, it wasn't just names and dates and transactions. He wrapped his hands around his cup. It was evidence of something that went higher than Choi, higher than Seoul. Marcus had been tracking money, how it moved, who touched it, whose hands it passed through before it became clean. And some of those hands belonged to people who are still very much alive, very much powerful, and very much invested in making sure that evidence never surfaces. Simone absorbed this. He knew, she said quietly. He knew before he died how dangerous it was. Yes. Is that why he didn't tell my mother where he was going? Why he kept the case off his official records? Her voice was level, but he could hear what it cost her. She thought he had a secret family. For years, she thought he had just walked away from us. Before we found out he was dead, she spent 2 years thinking he had chosen to disappear. Park Jin-soo said nothing. Sometimes silence was the most honest response. He was protecting you, she said. All of you. If no one knew who he trusted, no one could use them to get to the evidence. Yes. She looked at the Walther PPK on the counter. The gun her father had carried across 3 countries. The gun he had kept and never explained, because the person he would have explained it to was the person he was trying to protect. He should have told her, she said.
He should have found a way.
Yes, Park Jin-soo said again. He should have. They sat with that for a while. Then she said, I need to know what's in that evidence. All of it. I know. And I need to know if the man who came to you 2 years ago, the one you didn't trust, if he's connected to the people who killed my father. Park Jin-soo set down his cup. I have been wondering the same thing for 2 years. She looked at him sharply. His name, Park Jin-soo said, is Daniel Yoon. He presents himself as a retired intelligence analyst who has gone private. He is well-funded, well-connected, and very skilled at appearing trustworthy. But there are 2 things about him that have never sat right with me. What things? First, he knew about the matched guns. He mentioned them casually, as if it were common knowledge, which it was not. Marcus told me that system was known only to the people he trusted, which means either Yoon had access to Marcus's private records after his death, or he was there when Marcus talked about it, she finished. Yes. She was very still. And the second thing? She asked. He knew your name, Park Jin-soo said. He mentioned, in passing, that Marcus Carter had a daughter who had been asking questions. He said it in a way that was meant to sound like concern, but the way he said your name... He paused, choosing his words carefully. It sounded like a warning. The kitchen was very quiet. He's been watching me, she said. I believe so. For how long? I don't know, but I think, Simone, I think he may have been watching you for a very long time. And I think the reason I haven't given him what I have is because some part of me has always suspected that giving it to him would make it disappear, along with anyone who knew what was in it. She looked at him, really looked at him. Not as the man she had infiltrated, not as the mark she had spent 3 months building toward. As a person sitting across a table at midnight, telling her something she had needed to hear for 17 years, at considerable risk to himself. Why are you telling me all of this? She asked. You could have had me removed the moment you found the gun. You could have handed me to your people and made this entire problem go away. He was quiet for a moment. Because your father saved my life, he said simply. And because, for 18 years, I have been waiting for someone with a reason to finish what he started. He looked at the gun on the counter. He built a system, a matched pair, a proof of connection. He gave me one half, you have the other. That isn't a coincidence, Simone. That's the last instruction he ever gave, and neither of us understood it until tonight. She stayed until 2 a.m. They talked through everything. Her 17 years of searching, his 2 years of waiting, the evidence he had kept in a safety deposit box in a private bank that operated outside the standard networks, the testimony, the financial records, the communications, everything Marcus had compiled and passed to him before he died. Everything Marcus had died to protect. She told him about her mother, about growing up with the shape of a man-sized absence at the center of their life, about the box of belongings that had arrived from Seoul with no explanation, no official notification, just a shipping label and a customs form, and inside it, a gun that her mother had almost thrown away and that she, 15 years old and already suspicious of easy explanations, had intercepted. She told him about learning Korean, about the years of research, about the partial transaction log she had found in a digitized archive, a single line, a reference to a weapon, a physical description that matched, a buyer whose trail had eventually led her here. He listened the way her father must have listened, patient, still, taking everything in. When she finished, he said, "We have a problem." "Daniel Yoon," she said. "If he's been watching you and he knows you've taken this job, it's only a matter of time before he connects what you're doing here to what Marcus left behind. If he gets to the evidence before we can use it, he'll destroy it. Or use it himself. Control it. The information is worth a great deal to the right people. Not as justice, but as leverage." She thought about this. "We need to move faster than he expects." "Yes, but we also need to be careful. The moment we start making moves, he'll know." "Unless," she said slowly, "he thinks nothing has changed. Unless he thinks you still don't trust him, and I'm still just a housekeeper who's been here 3 months without finding anything." Park Jin-soo looked at her. "You want to use yourself as cover," he said. "I've been doing it for 3 months. I'm good at it." "It's dangerous." "My father spent 8 months doing it and got further than anyone before him." She held Park Jin-soo's gaze. "I know the risks. I've known them since I was 15. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "If we do this, we do it together. I have resources you don't. You have knowledge I don't. And Marcus trusted us both. For different reasons in different ways, but he did. That matters." "It matters," she agreed. He reached across the table and picked up the Walther PPK that had belonged to her father. He turned it over in his hands, running his thumb across the crescent-shaped scratch. Then he set it back down in front of her. "Keep it," he said. "It's yours." What happened in the next 6 days would later be described by the people who knew about it as either brilliant or insane, depending on who was doing the describing. It began with Park Jin-soo making a call to Daniel Yoon. Routine. He had done it 3 times in the past 2 years. Careful, non-committal conversations that gave Yoon enough to feel progress was possible without giving him anything real. This time, he told Yoon that he had been thinking, that he was close to making a decision about the material he had been sitting on, that he would need another week. Yoon, to his credit, played it well. He sounded patient, grateful, professionally restrained. Only someone who was looking for it would have noticed the very slight shift in his voice when Park Jin-soo mentioned the timeline. A fraction of a second's hesitation, barely a breath, the sound of a man recalibrating. Simone, listening on the other line from the kitchen, heard it immediately. "He's going to move," she said when the call ended. "He won't wait a week." "No," Park Jin-soo agreed. "He won't." They had already made their own arrangements. The safety deposit box contents had been photographed, encrypted, and transmitted through 3 separate channels. One to a journalist in London who had been investigating financial crimes in Southeast Asia for 6 years, and who received the files with a message explaining their origin and significance. One to an international law enforcement contact who owed Park Jin-soo a debt he had never called in until now. And one to an attorney in Atlanta who had represented Marcus Carter's estate and who Simone had spent 3 years building a careful, trust-based relationship with. The original materials remained in the box. What they needed now was for Yoon to reach for them. He came on the 3rd day. Not in person, he was too careful for that. He sent 2 men, professional, clean, the kind of men who existed in the space between legitimate security and criminal enterprise, who could be explained away and who left very little trace. They came for the box. What they found was Park Jin-soo waiting, and Simone beside him, with the gun her father had carried, and the absolute stillness of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 17 years. And behind them, visible through the glass partition of the bank's private client room, 2 men in suits who were not bank employees and who had been there for an hour before Yoon's people arrived. The law enforcement contact had called in his own people. Yoon's men looked at each other. The calculation was fast. Then they left. Which meant they went back to Yoon. Which meant Yoon knew. His call came 40 minutes later. Park Jin-soo put it on speaker. "I think," Yoon said, his voice still very smooth, very controlled, "that we have had a misunderstanding." "I don't think we have," Park Jin-soo said. A pause. "The material you're holding is complicated," Yoon said. "More complicated than you know. There are people connected to it who will not be pleased if this surfaces publicly. People with resources that make what you and I have look modest." "I know who they are," Park Jin-soo said. "Marcus Carter documented all of them." Longer pause. "Who is with you?" Yoon asked. Park Jin-soo looked at Simone. She nodded. "My name," she said, stepping closer to the phone, "is Simone Carter. I am the daughter of Marcus Carter. And I want you to know that everything my father built, every piece of evidence he died protecting, has already left this room. It is already in the hands of people who will use it correctly, and there is nothing you can do to stop that." The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It had a texture to it, the sound of something crumbling that had been built to seem permanent. "You don't understand what you've done," Yoon said, but his voice had changed. The smoothness was still there, but what was underneath it was different now. Not calculation, something older, something that sounded almost like fear. "I understand exactly what I've done," she said. "I finished what my father started, 18 years late, but finished." The line went dead. In the weeks that followed, the cases built themselves. The financial records Marcus had assembled, amplified by Park Jin-soo's own documentation of the years since, were thorough enough that 3 separate jurisdictions opened formal investigations. The journalist in London published a series that ran for 4 days and named names. 2 of those names were people whose public lives had been built on the careful burial of what Marcus Carter had uncovered. Daniel Yoon was arrested in Singapore 6 weeks after the phone call. He had been, as Park Jin-soo had suspected, not a rogue former analyst, but an active operative for one of the network's subsidiary arms, tasked specifically with locating and neutralizing the evidence Marcus had compiled. He had been watching Simone for 11 years, since she was 22, and had first made contact with people who knew her father's name professionally. He had known about the matched guns for 6 of those years. He had known she was close. He had not known about Park Jin-soo until 2 years ago, when a financial trail he was following had led him to that meeting. The meeting he had used to try to flush out what Park Jin-soo knew without revealing how much he already did. He had underestimated both of them. He had expected them to operate separately, to distrust each other, to never find each other. He had not planned for a gun with a crescent scratch, or for a woman careful enough to spend 3 months as a housekeeper, or for a man who had been waiting 18 years to pay a debt. Simone flew to Atlanta 3 months after the arrests. She sat in her mother's kitchen, the same kitchen she had grown up in, with the same window that faced the neighbor's oak tree and the same smell of the coffee her mother had drunk every morning for 40 years. She told her everything. It took 4 hours. Her mother cried in a way Simone had never seen her cry. Not the tight, controlled grief she had carried since Marcus disappeared, but something full and ungoverned, something that had needed all this time to have a reason to come out. She cried for the years she had spent thinking he had left them. She cried for the truth of why he had really gone. She cried for the way his silence had been its own kind of love, imperfect, costly, chosen. "He thought he was protecting us," Simone said. "He was," her mother said. He should have found another way." "Yes," Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. She looked at the Walther PPK on the table between them, the one with the crescent scratch, the one that had traveled from Marcus to Park Jin-soo to Simone's hands over 18 years and 3 continents. "What are you going to do with it?" her mother asked. Simone looked at the gun for a long time. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm not getting rid of it." Park Jin-soo called her the following week. He was methodical even about this, waited until business hours, as if they were professional colleagues, which in some sense they now were. "The last of the legal filings went through," he said. "The formal process will take time, but the essential work is done." "I know. My attorney called me." A beat. "How is your mother?" he asked. She was surprised by the question. Not because it was wrong, it wasn't, but because it came from him. "She's processing. It's a lot." "Yes." "She asked about you," Simone said. "She wanted to know who you were." "I told her." She paused. "She said to thank you." A longer beat. "Tell her she shouldn't," he said. "What I held, that was a debt, not a gift. Your father gave me my life. Keeping what he left was the least I could do." Another pause. "I should have found a way to do more. Sooner." "You couldn't have known who to trust." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "But it cost your family something that can't be paid back." She didn't argue with him. It was true, and he deserved to say it and be heard. "What happens to you now?" she asked.
The investigations. You're connected to things that aren't clean.
"Yes." His voice was steady. "I've made arrangements. The information I provided, the cooperation, there are understandings in place. My situation is complicated. It will remain complicated, but I am not unprepared for that." A pause. "I have been navigating complicated situations for a long time." "I know." "Simone." He said her name the way he had first said her father's, carefully, like something he was making sure to get right. "Your father built something. In the middle of danger, under enormous pressure, with limited time and limited resources, he built something that outlasted him, that found the people it needed to find, that did what it was meant to do, just slower than he intended." She listened. "That is not a small thing," he said. "That is, I don't know a word for what that is, but it is not small." She had to be quiet for a moment. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She went back to Seoul once more 6 months later. Not for the legal proceedings, her attorney handled those. She went because there was a place she wanted to see. A parking garage in Incheon, 7 stories, northwest corner of the 4th floor. She had found the address years ago. She had never gone. She stood there on a Tuesday afternoon in the exact spot where the record said Marcus Carter had been found. The garage smelled like oil and concrete and the particular coldness of spaces that never see the sun. She stayed for a long time. She didn't speak. She wasn't sure what she would have said. The years had not given her better words for this, only a harder-earned understanding of the shape of what she was carrying. What she knew now that she hadn't known before. Her father had not been careless. He had not walked into danger without a plan. He had built redundancies, contingencies, a system, and the system had worked, just on a timeline longer than anyone had wanted. He had not abandoned them. He had been protecting something larger than any single family, at a cost that was too high, for reasons that were real. That didn't fix it. Nothing fixed it. But it changed its texture. It changed the way the grief sat in her body, not lighter exactly, but more settled, like something that finally understood what shape it was supposed to be. She took the gun out of her bag, held it for a moment. The crescent scratch under her thumb, the worn grip, the weight she had memorized over 17 years of holding it in the dark when the loss felt too big to put down. Then she put it back. She was keeping it. There is a version of this story where the guns are just guns, where a scratch is just damage, and a matched pair is just a coincidence, and a woman hiding a weapon in a kitchen is just a criminal, and a mob boss is just a man protecting his territory. There is that version, but that is not what happened. What happened is that a man named Marcus Carter, 18 years ago, built a bridge between two people he trusted and hoped. Had to have hoped, because he ran out of time to do anything else. That the bridge would hold until someone needed to cross it. What happened is that a young Korean man with nothing left became the custodian of something larger than himself and carried it for 18 years without knowing if it would ever matter. What happened is that a woman raised on grief and silence and a gun she wasn't supposed to have spent 17 years becoming exactly the person she needed to be to finish what her father started. And what happened is that on a Tuesday night, in a kitchen in Seoul, at 11:47, the bridge held. A man saw a gun and recognized it. A woman started to cry, and it wasn't fear. And the thing Marcus Carter had built, patient, distributed, durable, finally arrived. If this story made you feel something, if it stayed with you, then you understand exactly why these stories are worth telling.
The ones where ordinary people carry extraordinary things for longer than anyone should have to.
The ones where the truth takes decades to reach the surface, but comes up whole. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one, not because we ask, because you'll want to be here for the next one.